Think of a time when you experienced a conversation that left you with a new perspective, or perhaps an inquiry, or you might have felt that something has shifted in you after that conversation. Maybe it helped you gain a new level of clarity, or moved you to take action. That was a coaching conversation.
Hello and welcome to the Coaching Conversation podcast. This is your host, Salah Al-Lethi, and I am excited to have with me today William Strydom.
William is an agilist who's currently spreading the joy of modern ways of working and agility across teams, departments, and organizations. William is also a certified professional enterprise coach. His focus is leadership development and agile coaching.
William and I met years ago, and we've been connecting virtually and also in person when we were in person. Most recently, we co-facilitated a session together at Agile Coach Camp in DC. I don't know, I'd say like maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It was about our journey to professional coaching.
Welcome, William.
I'm glad you're here.
Thank you very much, Salah. I always enjoy when our paths cross, be it in person or virtually. And yeah, we did do a session, I think it was at Agile Coach Camp in Washington, DC. And it's more, how do we introduce people to professional coaching and different pathways to it? Just sharing our knowledge. It's always good to dance with you in front of the room.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking for the conversation emerge. So I just want to step back and start with your journey. What's been your journey like? What's your story? How did you end up doing this coaching work?
So it's almost like, let's explore where you came from so we can talk where we want to go.
Well, yeah, absolutely. That's a good way to put it. You know, that's the coaching structure. Like, where are you today and where are you now and where you want to go? I'm glad you put it that way.
I come from software development. I was way back when a mainframe developer. That already ages me and dates me probably. Gone through a similar path as a lot of people who's in Agile now. I went through project management. Then I was at a .com, a small startup, running their R&D department. And there we were doing Agile, but although we didn't really know it at the time, we kind of got this inclination of what we were doing and trying out Scrum and Kanban. And I always tell people we were doing it all the wrong ways, but it's how we were learning and trying to figure out how this stuff works. And then this was about 2014, 2015, I ran across the Agile Coaching Institute, did some coaching classes with them. I did the one boot camp in Boston, and about 9 months later, another boot camp in California with them. And of course, as most people will say, you come out different on the other side, which happened to me as well. And that's also when I did a pivot and decided to become an Agile coach. And that was ever since then, I've been a full-time Agile coach, training, practicing, and just chatting with people about it like you and others.
I'm really fascinated by the fact that everyone I talked to so far, or at least in this area of Agile coaching, the line of work that we do, trace their story or interest in professional coaching to the Agile Coaching Institute with Lisa Atkins and Michael Spade and others. It really makes me think about the impact that they had on a lot of us in terms of gaining this curiosity around that field and coaching as a profession, in addition to the Agile coaching as well. So I know the theme of today is around self-development and growth. I'm curious to know your perspective on why so much interest in the professional coaching today, especially among Agile coaches specifically, because that's the work we do. But in general, I've seen an increase in interest of people getting into this world.
It's a great question. I've also noticed, a lot of people, especially getting ICF certified, going way deeper into that one wedge of the Agile coaching, because for us, it's kind of an overloaded word because it's not just pure coaching. There's mentoring, training, facilitation. It's all we play between those different competencies. And one of the things that I found is, once again, it's that journey that started as I was going out of those, the world started to look different for me. I went through 2 coaching schools just to figure out what was this all about? What is this coaching thing all about? So, and once again, like a lot of people, I went through coactive coaching and through ARSC from CRR Global. And in doing that, I also found out, there's so many other coaching schools. The Neuroscience Institute, the Strozzi Institute, where you do somatic coaching. It's all those different areas that I never even knew about. And it's like coaching is a whole world in and of itself. And then I also found that it becomes a balance and an integration. Part of it for me, as I was learning more of this, I could bring more of it back to the work I was doing. When I was in organizations, it was kind of like, yes, we need to facilitate this agile meeting for people and show them and role model it. And then there's also, where do you come from? What's your come from place? And that was really influenced for me, especially when I started to go out of coactive coaching into the ARSC coaching, where I was more doing group coaching. That's kind of when that came alive for me. So it's almost like I want to tell people, go learn these things. Also keep practicing it. Make it part of what you do in your daily activities, whatever it may be, because that's where, to me, the power lies. That's kind of, it almost starts bordering on, we learn stuff, and not just by courses, probably from reading books, talking to people like you and me, just discussing topics, different viewpoints and perspectives people have got around it. And then you start getting to, what is my own? How do I make whatever I'm taking out of those books and courses and conversations, and what does it do for me? And how do I then take it back into the world? So
I know everyone's journey is unique, but I think yours is very unique in terms of how you went through both professional coaching schools, or at least like the ORSC and the coactive. Many of us, including myself, I went through coactive and then just paused. I did initially wanted to check both. So I took the fundamentals for both and then decided coactive was where I wanted to start. And so when I reflect back on that session we did together, we were talking about it from different perspectives. Can you say more about the difference between the two? How did you decide that you're going to take both, or how did you plan it and what happened?
Yeah, one, of course, is I'm a sucker for punishment, kind of going through two certification processes there. But no, it's a wonderful question, because there is some logic behind it. I was fortunate enough when I went through my coactive coaching classes, Jim Patterson was still alive, and he was talking to me. It was my fundamentals class for CTI, and I was like telling him, I'm trying to figure out, should I do ARSC or should I stay with coactive coaching? And during one break, he said, come sit and chat with me a little bit about this. And he explained to me the origins of both and how they actually fit together in a way where coactive coaching it's one-on-one coaching skills. I really use a lot of those skills now in my executive coaching, and my clients have got in that arena where I work with them. And then I could also see ARSC was building on, because when you go through ARSC, it's like they don't teach you the fundamentals of coaching. They go, yes, it's more advanced. And how do you apply these to groups, and how do you work with, like we talk about the third entity or the identity of a team, or work with them as a collective. And so for me, it was a further growth opportunity and deepening that for a specific area. Of course, it was also so much more. It's working with teams, but also you can start seeing what impacts you can have on culture, be it in an organization or in a department. Sometimes it's like organizations can be huge and you will only have impact or influence in a small area there. But then how can you still make the most of it? So when you leave, it still continues to happen, and you leave that little bit of a legacy there for them to build on and work with when you're not there.
I heard similar perspectives from others who've gone through ORSC and coactive. Not many I've met have gone through the two path, but this idea of like focusing on the individuals and then focusing on the teams, or in the ORSC language, systems, because there are two different things. And I have been very curious and learning about this for a while. What happens first is, do we focus on the individual and then the individual would change the system, or do we focus on changing the system and the system influence the individuals within the system to change? So we can go that route in a second, but I'm just curious, like, what did you hear from that conversation when you heard the origin from Jim, and how did you come out with this decision? Okay, this is the path I'm going to take first before, and then ORSC, or maybe you did both at the same time, like you said.
So I did the fundamentals of both, of coactive coaching and ARSC. And even when I did the fundamentals for ARSC, I did it up in Canada and Toronto. And that's kind of where I was kind of a little bit, okay, they thought there's some things they were talking here and taking things for granted that I don't have yet. And that's kind of when I went like, okay, maybe let me go back and let me take a pause and just go slowly through this journey. You don't have to rush to get to the other side. So that's when I said, I want to get ARSC, but I'm going to pause that and concentrate on coactive coaching. Let's figure out, am I really a coach and can I become one? So and I went through that journey. So it was part of it was my identity to figure out what this really is, what it means. And even though it was one-on-one coaching, because I had the fundamentals from ARSC ARS, I could translate a little bit of it into how to work with teams. And I was fortunate enough at that point, I was still in organizations working with teams. I wasn't working at portfolio level or anything. I was kind of like a team coach at that point, which was great because there I could work with individuals and with the teams. And so I could start putting what I learned into practice. And that's kind of where it became for me where, okay, this is what this coaching muscle is. This is what that competency is all about. And then I completed the coactive journey. And then I was kind of like, okay, now I can pause and let's go back to ARS. And I went a little slower through ARS. There was a time where I did like one course a year, but whatever I learned there, I kept applying. And when I went back for the next course, I was kind of like, okay, because they do build on each other. I was just like, okay, so this is kind of good. I know how that works now. And oh, here's something new, So
yeah, that resonates with me because I am actually going through the ORSC journey right now, and I'm taking it slow. Just like you mentioned, like I did one course like I think the fundamentals I did like maybe 3 years ago, and then now I'm trying to get like back into the second one I just finished last year, and then the third one. But yeah, they do build on each other. So I had similar experience where I wanted to work on myself first, and then just practice and apply the things that I've learned, and then also deepen the view and the practice with groups and systems. So as you've gone through both paths and you're an expert in those two areas, how do you see growth and learning happen? Do you see more of in organization? Do you see more of people working on themselves and then they are able to change the system that they're in, or do you see working on the systems and then that system will help grow people within that system?
I think there's probably a little bit of both happening, to be honest. The way that I go around with change is I do work on both sides, actually. For me, it's really great when I get into an organization and the leadership is willing for me to work with them, be it directors, VPs, whoever is willing to allow me to coach them and grow them. The other side is then when there's teams, or sometimes these days it's kind of like at portfolio level. So it's kind of like larger groups that we're working with, and how do we impact them? And I make cohorts like the Scrum Masters or the product owners, or sometimes there's people that's more doing like product development where they're doing more lean startup things. So bringing those groups, so I can bring the ideas to groups and not just individuals. And then the challenge would be for change to happen, it will happen at the individual level. So the persons that's there will start gaining the knowledge. They will start doing the work. And over time, as they're working on that, there'll be that aha moments for them where they go, I was thinking in this pattern. Now I'm thinking in this new pattern. And now I get what it's about. And that's when they will start holding that change. So at that point, it's almost like I've got now an exit strategy because I don't need to be there forever and a day. Once they get, or I can bring them to the next idea. But at some point I get where they've now grown as far as I can grow them. Then it's time for me to leave. And for me, this is a little bit of what comes out from edge theory from Margaret Wheatley and the other change theory folks, where what happens there is you tip a percentage of them over and they will then hold that change in place and they will start helping the others. So we talk about the leapers that will go early, the road builders that will keep it in place, and your traditionalists, which are normally the last folks to go. And you sometimes need to give them a job. What of the tradition, what of the past is good that they want to hold on to and bring into that new change. So there's that balance that they strike. So for me, that's kind of how I'm working. I've got a big group, I'll notice those different categories that people will fall in. And then I still work with the leadership folks because they set the conditions for this to happen. If you can't change what they're doing, like sometimes we get into an organizations and they're very command control. It was really successful for them in the past, and that's their pattern. That's what works for them. So they keep on doing it. But as we want them to start looking into, sense and respond to what's happening or what they're learning or noticing, their leadership style needs to change. So they themselves need to grow for that. And once you get them to grow, then they can start creating those conditions. And then the change in the teams are easier. So that's what I'm saying. It's like I'm looking for levers to pull, and where do I pull them? How far can I pull them? All those kind of things come into play.
I think that's what I'm seeing also is this, they go hand in hand. And, sometimes that's one of the biggest takeaways takeaways for me from the ORSC is this idea of the edge, helping from the primary to secondary, or like, getting through the edge. And usually if the leaders are not of the group are not able to go over that edge, then most of the time the group won't be able to kind of pull through. And again, like you said, or at least what I heard you saying is like, just because the leader went over that edge, it doesn't mean that everyone is going to follow. They have to create that environment where others are creating this sort of container for others to be more confident moving forward.
Yeah, a great example of what you're just describing there to me now, is especially with the pandemic that we're in, is first, it was mostly we all work in the office. We wanted to have that in person. There were some companies that were doing remote, but a lot of people didn't even know they existed. And then, of course, we were thrusted through the pandemic to all work remotely. So it wasn't a choice. We were all forced to do that. And now we're getting to, well, we don't know. We'll see what happens with the Delta and all the variants that's coming out now. But people are starting to figure out what's the new normal and how much of it is this hybrid, and what would the hybrid look like? And for me, that's a classic one where every organization, and once again, it's my opinion, it's not to say this is how it's going to work out, but I think every organization should talk with everybody, the leadership and the people doing the work, and what is their equilibrium that they want to strike with this. Might it be 1 day in the office and 4 days at home, or is it 4 days in the office and 1 day at home? Who knows what that balance will be like? But I think and it might oscillate. Some weeks it's more in the office, other weeks less. But I think there's a conversation that they need to have to strike what that will be and what works, and experiment with it.
And that takes us to this topic about dialogue, which we're probably going to get into. So I want to step back a little bit and maybe get a brief definition around a system. I know people may think of systems in different ways, but the relationship coaching systems has a definition on its own. Can you just say more about that so that we can set the stage?
I hope I can remember the right one, but I know you'll help me.
It hasn't to be like word for word definition, but what, like, the essence of it.
You mentioned the word relationship, and to me, that's what this is all based on. Like an artificial thing we put in place is like when we talk about teams. A group of people are put together and they're saying, you're a team now. And why we come in and do team building is to strengthen the relationships there. So, and then the group will turn into a team, or in this case, it's also, I'll start classifying it as a system. But the system is also bigger because it's also like the people they report to. And now you start getting relationships and communication lines. And it's the managers, directors, all those people around the system. So now you'll start what we call nested systems. So you'll have the teams, you'll have the people around the teams that hold them in space, because that become a larger system. And then they will all fit within, be it a department, or sometimes that's the whole organization if you're working with a smaller startup or something like that. And so it is based on the relations and communications that will form the system, and the people that interact with each other almost on a daily basis. And what's your definition that's different than mine on that one?
This is how I think of it as well. I'm imagining this, the minimum, like two people interacting with each other, each one of them their own system, and then the relationship between those two people is that system as well. So the relationship and that person A and person B, this is all part of that system. And then you expand it on that at scale. Imagine those two people with the relationship in the middle, and then now we have like the number of other people that they interact with and all the relationships in between. It gets very complex. It's interesting. A lot of ways, like you said, there are some places where you start to kind of poke the system. And it's like, if you want to see how the system is, or at least like an example of how people interact with each other in a meeting, for example, that's kind of an example of how, might point you to how the system at large operates. So you mentioned something about having a conversation. You used the example now that's relevant to the time that we're in. People are coming back to the office. Some people want to come back. Some people don't want to come back. There's a lot of friction, and it's something that is worth a dialogue or conversation. Some people are not sure if they are comfortable coming back, or, if they come back, how they're going to interact being co-located. So that idea of dialogue, when you say they need to have this conversation, what's a good way to design this sort of dialogue to help people feel heard and be in it rather than just feeling like they have to be forced into it?
There's some prerequisites that will probably be needed. And you already mentioned like psychological safety, because if people can't speak up and speak what's on their minds, then it ain't going to happen. It will stay covert or outside the room or outside the conversation. And it needs to come into the room. It needs to be there when the leaders are asking for it. People need to voice their concerns. And also just from their side, what's there for them. And they need to be heard. And that, once again, then that becomes information. So whoever is going to make the decision can make a way more informed decision. And because it's now going to be based on everybody's input, not just one or two or somebody that's more dominant. But because, I believe some of the quieter voices also need to be heard. Because some introverts probably, I don't say they yearn for this, but for them, their edge might be higher than somebody else. And then you get the extroverts who wants the people around them. And how do we get the balance between those? And so for dialogue, it is, you've got to have psychological safety. You've got to work on trust. So whatever the people then give their input for, that it will go somewhere. I don't know what the answer is going to be in this situation for organizations, but part of the work that I'm currently doing comes from David Cantor. He's got, it's all around the dialogical models that he created. So it's speech patterns, the languages people use, because sometimes people, it feels like they're talking across each other, because somebody is talking in meaning and another person is talking in affect and another person is talking in power. And it's kind of like they're saying the same things, but they're talking across each other. And then the domains that they're working this in as well, open, random, closed. And I'm using all these words, and for some people are going, what is he talking about? But it's all around. It's just a model we've got so that we can view communication, get people to actually get them to listen to what's being said. And so they can also hear what's being said. And then how do they want to move it forward? And it's also a way to work with conflict, where conflict has got a lot of, like, in general, if you tell people, hey, I work with conflict, then they're all like, oh, so it's you work with that negative energy. No, actually, it's not. It's a perspective, and it brings correction, is kind of what Cantor brings in from his model. And that kind of puts it in a different light. And all of a sudden, it just means if somebody says, here's the direction we want to go in, that opposition doesn't mean, it might bring a correction. And all of a sudden you might go, oh, we haven't thought about that idea. And that may be the solution, or it may lead to the solution. So that's why we say, don't leave conflict out of the door. Sometimes you want to bring it in, but you've got to have a strong enough container to hold it with the psychological safety and trust and people getting to know each other as well.
That model is very useful to help us understand what's happening with the group. And I first learned it from Marsha Aker, and I just want to go a little deeper with you on that. Like, if I remember correctly, there are 4 different modes: someone make a move, someone oppose, or bystander, or follower. Yeah. So as you look at those 4, and it's almost like you're coding some sort of a dialogue or a conversation. You're finding, how, or observing what's happening with the group. Like you said, they may be talking over each other, and that creates a conflict. And if they are talking over each other and they're not listening and they're not familiar with what's going on, then that conflict will not be resolved. So as you're looking at it from those different modes, how do you usually point that this is happening, or how do you help the group not talk over each other and notice what's going on?
No, great questions. Yeah, it's kind of, we talk about, it's the being an interventionist when you're working with this. So, and you can do it implicit or explicit. Implicit might mean, because I've got the knowledge, I've been through the training, and I know how to use the different modes. So what I can do there is bring information to the system or team or group that I'm working with to make them aware of it. And so I'm using it implicitly. And that's normally if I've got a short period of time, or it might just be 1 or 2 meetings we'll be together. I'll do it implicitly. And I will voice what I'm noticing in the room. Oh, I'm hearing you've got your point of view, the other person's got their point of view, and the two of you are having a debate now. And you just name it. It's not like you're saying it's good or bad, or what do you want to do different now? And so we talk about we want to activate the bystand, bringing in information into that conversation. If I'm working with teams longer, I will make it more explicit. So I will do a little teach around the model so they can also start seeing what I'm seeing in the conversation. And the big thing that we're doing here, or for me, one of the things that's cardinal behind all this in the dialogue is we want to start separating the what from the how. Because the what's being said, because normally what happens when conflict comes up, it's emotion and people, oh, that was a very heated conversation. That's the what. And we want to bring out the how, which is neutral. And it also just brings out, okay, so we had moves with opposition that was happening. And we're not saying the one is good or bad. We're just saying that's what's happening. And what do we do different if we want to change it, if we want to make it more of an inquiry or generative dialogue, which will move us forward to the future and actually might come up with solutions or new ideas. And so that's kind of the kind of work that I enjoy doing with groups and teams, where we get them to, they walk out of the room and they go, okay, we've moved forward. Or sometimes they come like, this is the experiment we're going to do. We don't know if it's the solution yet, but it's something we're going to try out. So,
and like you said, I mean, those different stances, each of them is important. It's not like, you have to be in a specific stance. Like if you're constantly making a move and not giving people enough time to respond, then it becomes very, very exhausting, right? Constantly move, let's move. And then if you're opposing constantly, then again, there's nothing is going to get done because there's constantly opposing. And if you're all in a bystander or following, then it's not going to enrich the conversation, right? Because, you're either following what's going on or just noticing as a bystander. And, even though you're part of the team, you're not really adding your voice to the system. And so what I heard you say, like you act as maybe sometimes the voice of the system and naming what's going on. And also like in the ORSC lingo, maybe that's raising the awareness of the group of what's going on, like what's happening and what's trying to happen and what are we noticing or what are you noticing? Are there any other questions or ways that you apply to help the group find the impact or find out how? I know you said you teach them the model so that they can observe what's happening as well. Is there anything else?
Yeah, it kind of, once again, depending on the time, because the models that David have got, there's actually 4 layers to them. I do start with the speech acts to get people there, because as you were describing, they get into what we call stuck patterns. There's either serial moving, where they just come up with whole new ideas, but nothing ever gets completed. Or we get that move oppose, which is it's almost like a debate happening every time they meet. Or you get that courteous compliance, like you said, where somebody says, it's normally when a group is just, or the team is forming, somebody says, we're going to do this. And everybody's like, yes, we're going to do it. And they all follow. But there's no correction. It might not be the correct thing they're doing. It's just whoever was the natural leader, and everybody keeps following. So part of it then is, as I'm working with the teams and getting them to understand that, once they get that model and they start to identify their own stuck patterns, then they get to, how do we break it? And it's a matter of bringing all 4 the speech acts in: a move that will set the direction, an oppose that will bring correction, a follow that will take the action further. And the follow can be for the oppose. It doesn't have to be for the move. And then the bystand, which is voiced, not just thought in your head, but once it's voiced, it brings neutral information into the conversation. And if you've got all 4 those speech acts active, then the team will be in what we call inquiry mode. And at that point, somebody might still be needed to facilitate, to make sure all 4 of the speech acts comes out. But over time, if that group really bonds and they get really good at it, they'll get into what we call the generative dialogue, or where the team moves from what we call the I space, which is the individual, into the group space, the we space, where that true identity comes online and they become a true system. And at that point, they strengthen the relationship, their speech acts all come online. And that's when you get that generative dialogue, where people build on each other's ideas in small increments.
I really like the language you're using with, activate the dialogue and go into an inquiry mode. It's really fascinating that, sometimes we don't notice these things in dialogue. We could probably tell when the conversation is rich and there's a lot of, curiosity with the group. But, if we're not really trained to see these different modes and understand like how the group is interacting, then most of the time it's like, we're stuck. That was a heated conversation, but we don't really know what to do. Like, how do we advance this dialogue or conversation forward? It's just we're stuck and we don't know how to deal with that stuckness. So just to follow up on that a little, where do you see the group or us lacking in terms of the mode? Like, is it, I know it's probably depending on the group and the culture of the company, but what's the most missing? Is it the kind of oppose, or is it a bystander noticing what's happening and, bringing it to the surface? Like
Yeah,
overall.
yeah. So for me, it's a little bit more subtle, because as the speech acts are laid out, there's actually because we, especially from coactive coaching, we talk about the being and doing,
Mhm.
and speech acts are the doing of the dialogue. But there's a being side behind it, that almost a come from place. There's the you want to respect. So in that is like when you bring in a pose, you also want to be respect of the other person that you're doing the oppose against, whosoever idea that is. There's also the listening aspect. There's a voicing aspect, and then I forget the fourth one now. But each of these speech acts have got a being space behind it. And the big thing for me there is to kind of start making people aware of that. And that's also, once again, it's almost like from these different models and things we've learned from these various schools, they've got slight nuances on them, but it's different things. Like in ours, we talk about what's the 2% truth of the person that's opposing you. So what's that truth they've got, or the curiosity you've got? If you suspend what's there for you, what do you gain then as you listen to this other person? And I sometimes tell people, you've got your idea, doesn't make it wrong, but if you suspend your idea, don't let go of it, just suspend it so that you can listen to what the other person is saying. Try and use empathy, get in their shoes. What's the 2% truth that's there for them? Now come back to your own idea and see what's there now, what's changed. So there's these nuances that come into play with these. And a lot of people, it's as we say with coaching, the growth happens between the sessions, not in the session. So even for dialogue, in the conversation, we will bring, especially if I'm like, we're trying to activate the bystanders for them. So people start voicing that neutral stance and bringing more information in. It's then as they reflect between their dialogue sessions, what will change for the group and how they will show up differently the next time. Especially if I'm working with them long enough where I'm doing a little bit of teach and then getting them to do their work, but using this model and seeing how it changes for them. It's really powerful over time.
It is very powerful. It's this idea of suspending your idea of temporarily to hear the other person can be very difficult, especially when you're passionate about this idea that you're proposing or you want to bring to the table. It's hard to kind of like step back and just listen to the other person and where they're coming from, and like the 2% truth, as you mentioned, and seeing what they're seeing. Is basically they're trying to help you see something that you may not be seeing, but you don't want to see it because you're holding on to your own idea, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's that passion. It's kind of the emotion that's also part of us in our conversations. And that's kind of when I was talking earlier about the what and the how. And the what we're saying, it's that emotion is there. You're holding on because you're seeing that as the answer. And why is the other person not seeing it the way you're seeing it? And the voice changes, the voice tone and all those things. And then you can bring in the how are you saying it? I'm hearing that's a move, and you bring in an oppose, and you guys it feels like you stuck on that line of advocacy. You keep advocating for your point of view. But what if we suspend it? What if you make that other point your point? Because ownership, there's something around ownership that changes things as well.
It makes me think of another concept that we learned in coactive, this idea of the saboteurs, right? And the saboteurs, they get triggered when there's something that's about to change. And at a group level, it's almost like the saboteurs are having the meeting, not us, right? And then we're watching our saboteurs meeting while we're stand and watch and try to figure out what's going on. So like you said, these are skills that are not really limited to groups and teams and organizations. I think it's in general can be very valuable to a community or a society to understand how to have a dialogue that enrich the conversation and advance the dialogue rather than limit the options and restrict the voices in the system. So I want to touch upon something you said earlier about this generative dialogue. What is that about? What does that mean?
Great question. This comes from Otto Scharmer, his work. I learned from it in a book called Dialogue by Bill Isaac. And he had Fields of Conversation, is what it's called. And he had it in there, where we start with that courteous compliance almost is like the first stage he talks about. And if we do it almost in a linear way, then you move to breakdown, is what Otto describes there. And from breakdown, a lot of people will move back to that courteous compliance. It's kind of like, no, we want to go back to politeness. That's kind of that space. So a lot of people oscillate between those. And what we're advocating then for is, no, you want to get to the next area, which is called inquiry, where all four of the speech acts are present. And that's the space where you start at least becoming, and I love the word curious when you brought that into the conversation, because that's the place where you get curious about the other. Why did they bring up that concept? Or I've got mine, you've got yours, but what's different, what's similar, all that. Become really curious, unpack it, look at it from all angles. It's the place of inquiry. And then we get further where to stay in that place of inquiry will, at the beginning, take a lot of facilitation and holding space for that to happen. And as people get more comfortable, the trust goes up, the psychological safety is in place, and the people get to know each other even better. And they build those muscles around that suspension and listening. The listening goes up because they're listening for what is the meaning behind what the other person is saying, not just listening to answer. And all of a sudden they found themselves in that space of general dialogue, which is the fourth space. So you go from politeness to breakdown to inquiry and then to generative dialogue. And generative dialogue, that's kind of where people talk around, and I normally use the context of high performing teams. That's where if they start working on something and you ask the team, hey, that's a great solution, how did you come up with it? And they go, nobody did, we did. They start talking like that because it's like somebody will start a sentence and somebody else will continue it and somebody else will finish it. And they do it unconsciously. It's just the way they work now. And that's that space of generative dialogue in the context of high performing teams.
I'm thinking of the concept of flow and being in the zone, but at the team level. Or maybe an organization level, you're in flow, you're in the zone. There's a lot of focus and understanding of what's going on, and not being constantly interrupted by these small, or not small, but conflicts around whose idea should be implemented. It's more like looking at these ideas with some understanding what's happening with these ideas. From the ORSC world, you have people seeing each other as a problem versus looking at the problem as a third entity. I think if the organization or the team reach that level that you're describing, where they're building on each other's ideas, challenging each other's ideas, and moving from that courteous compliance to more inquiry and generative dialogue, then I believe that's where the high performance we're talking about is not just the cranking out, more work or features, or and it's more about like, how do we work together as a team, as a group, and not be compliant based on who proposed the idea, the loudest voice in the room. So as you're describing all these different concepts, it seems like there's this theme, or they're saying similar things in different ways. You talked about the Cantor model, the 4 different areas, the generative dialogue, the systems, and ORSC. I know we talked about integrating some of the different works. How are you seeing these things same or different in your experience?
It's always new or different perspectives on what's there. It's kind of like reality is there, but you can see it from different angles and perspectives, and people will articulate it different. They'll make it their own in a different way. And all of a sudden it gets to the point where it's not the truth, but there's truths, because it's small pieces of it that can probably add up and become this ultimate truth, what's there. But it's like, which angle are you looking at it? Which one is true at that moment? And so when you're looking at it from these different schools and models and all of these things, that's kind of why I'm saying, learn it, make it your own, and then see how can you apply it? How can you take it out into the world? But there's that internal process that will happen. And for me, I use the word integrate, but other people will probably talk about internalizing it. So you make your own sense of it and how you will go and apply it then. And for me, it's interesting over time how that same concept can keep reincarnating itself, because you wrapping more things around it. And that was probably one of the things that I noticed as I was finishing the R certification and I started to apply these things in the workplace. It becomes, yes, you can now, it's more than just integrating what I learned in R school. It was more than just what I learned at the co-active coaching. It was like putting those all together, plus some of the things I learned at the leadership circle with adult development. development, and all of a sudden you start, every so often you bring one more thing in that you keep mashing, and it's kind of like you've got this ball of yarn and it keeps getting bigger and bigger. But it's like, and how do we put it to good use? So there is that point then where it's the internal growth that happens, where you need to sit back and reflect on these. And it's not just a matter of, what do I keep hoarding and what do I keep grabbing to bring to you? Sometimes it's like, no, pause, see what you've got. How do you use it? When do you use it? Where do you use it? And then keep reflecting back on that, which almost becomes like that. You want to bring in like double or triple loop learning, where you go, just when I did this, that happened. And okay, I'll change this. And that's just one loop. And you're going to go, no, but how was I thinking when I was doing that? Oh, and now you're bringing in that second loop around it. And then you get what's the new concept I can bring in? And that's all of a sudden, now you're bringing a third loop in. And you've got to evolve, but you've got to master that yourself first before you can bring it in to help others to see that.
It's almost like looking at it as a scientist. You have all these different experiments that you want to try and validate. Okay, this works here, or this doesn't work here. And okay, why didn't it work? How do I tweak it to make it work in this context or this environment? Rather than applying it the way it is. Maybe there is some value in trying it the way it is, so that you know what to tweak. But again, it may be helpful to find what is this group or team or individual ready for, and then go from there.
Yeah, I liked where you're going with that. Yeah, it is that. It's the contextual. What is this organization or department you're working in? Because what works in one, even if it was really successful and you duplicate it at another organization and it's not the same, it won't work, or something else will, then you need to tweak. And like you're saying, meeting people where they're at. So yeah, a lot of times you come in all rah-rah and these people are like, oh, we're in the middle of a change and my friends are getting laid off and I don't know if I'm going to be here tomorrow. And you're all like, no, agile is the thing. And you're like, and they like, no, it's not. It doesn't mean that to us. So you've got to figure out what's happening, what's there, where they're at, how do we, and then move them forward.
I think that might be something that we explore a little bit here, that this idea, you mentioned the framework, or at least, the different stances, the coaching, professional coaching, facilitation, teaching, and consulting and mentoring. And this idea of like the coaching versus consulting, there is a lot of discussion sometimes that we see that makes them almost like opposites of each other. Okay, you're coaching or consulting, and coaching is this and consulting is that, and you're either coaching or not coaching. Like it seems like more binary than a spectrum. And when we spoke in the past, it's like there's a spectrum or a dial that you can dial up and down depending on what's happening. So what do you say about this idea? Like, consulting and coaching, these are different things. And if you're doing coaching, then you shouldn't be providing your opinion or telling people or suggesting, recommending things. It seems like people are thinking coaching is just like asking a lot of questions and listening. And these are the main two skills that everyone seems to be focused on.
It has become a polarized topic in certain groups, and other groups are totally fine and comfortable with it. For me, my agile coaching model have got very little to none consulting in it. But that doesn't mean consulting is wrong or bad. We shouldn't do it. If you meet an organization or a group and they don't have any answers and they're really new to it and they don't know what they're doing, consulting may be an answer for them at that moment in time. And it might move them forward and get them going. For me, it's more, whatever I want to do on consulting, I probably now have started to do when I'm doing teaching or training. So I will bring new concepts in that way for them. And I want to bring it in a way where I go, this is it for now, for this moment in time. But I want you to think a little bit further. How do you keep evolving it? Because part of it for me is something that speeds you up now might slow you down later. And that's kind of where, if you hold on to that consulting answer that you got, it will move you forward now. And a couple of months or a year from now, it might become the thing that holds you back. So that's why for me, I want to get to the point where, and that's kind of why I'm leaning way more into the coaching and mentoring. And mentoring is also more years, a little bit of my experience being shared with you. And I always like to, if I can, become more skillful at telling them when it worked and when it didn't work, because it's just an option for them and they can choose what they want to do with it. So my definition of consulting is, here's an answer, here's when it worked, here's when it didn't work. And oh, by the way, what do you want to do with it, because it doesn't mean you have to do it.
Yeah.
And I also want to tell you at some point you can let go of it because it's going to hold you back. And I want you to keep going forward and keep getting better. And I want you to move past it and transcend it and keep going. So that's kind of like my relationship that I have with consulting. And so I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying I'm doing very little of it, if at all. So for me, I stand more in that agile coaching where I will be teaching you if that's what you need. There'll be the mentoring where I'll share with you, and then I'll do a lot of facilitation and coaching as I'm working with you and your teams.
It's back to that idea that you mentioned earlier about trying to activate the dialogue, the inquiry, and self-correct based on these models rather than just telling them here's what you need to do. And I agree with you in terms of okay, maybe it's a starting point to show, okay, share here's what I've done in other places or maybe in different contexts, and this is why it worked, or this is how it worked, and this may work here or may not. So it's offering an idea without attachment. And that's the thing. Sometimes consulting feels like telling them, here's the answer. And now, even though you provided an answer to them at this particular time, after a while, as a consultant, when you're not there anymore, they don't have the tools to find their own answer. They just look for someone to provide the answer. So I think the coaching provides this another skill set that help, you as a consultant or facilitator or mentor, help people find their own answers using these different questions and tools and models so that they can get to that generative dialogue and get to that understanding of how they can operate together and move beyond speaking at each other to speaking with each other, right?
We want to unlock the evolution. We want them to move from one stage to the next. And it's almost like the light, the touch we can do, and the more they can get into the mindset of things keep changing, because change is constant. Even myself, I'm not always comfortable with change. There's some changes I don't want, and there's others that I crave. But there's that evolutionary aspect behind all this, and that's what we need to instill. And that's once again, that more from the space I'm coming from. Consulting is kind of might put you in one of those areas, but I want to put you where we might start a little further back. We'll go across that point, and then we'll keep you going forward, keep you evolving and growing. Because I don't want to have a snapshot in time. I want you to, because the world is keep changing ever faster now. So and people need to keep up with it, and then organizations. So if they can't get to that point where they're evolving and learning and growing, that consultant answer won't serve them 6 months or a year from now.
I think this idea of growth and constant or development as a group, as an individual, and as a system, they go hand in hand, like we talked earlier. And if there is a dependency on just one answer or one view, then it doesn't allow for this idea of growth and development, right? We're stuck on this constant movement. There is no, if we use the Cantor model, the structure, we're constantly moving and trying to find answers rather than challenging those answers or reflecting on those answers as a bystander. So it helps to have different angles or lenses to look at how we're working rather than be in one stance. And that's all we know. That's when we don't really enrich the dialogue. It becomes just one way and the way and not able to listen to other views and perspectives. So as we're wrapping up here, what are some takeaways or pointers you want to share, or anything that you would like to point before we go?
I think we're getting to the point where there is enough agile coaches in the world now where we can start doing we're not consultants, we're coaches. And this is how we go about doing our work. And I hope we keep elevating that. And it's not that the people, because I mean, even now when I go in and work in organizations, there's always the consulting contract that you need to sign. And how can we keep evolving that so it becomes not a consulting contract, but a coaching contract that we have and working with, and where it can evolve, and what's in there is more outcome-based things and not statements of work and things like that. That's almost like more conducive to the consulting world. And the other thing for me is, how can people keep sharing what they learned, put it back out in the world, and we can all learn from each other? because I won't know everything, but I know some things, and I'm willing to share what I have with others.
I totally agree with you on that front. Learning and sharing, learning and reflecting on the experience is definitely a way to elevate that dialogue and try to find different stories and how people use different skills in different situations and contexts. And that definitely raised the bar, for all of us. And yeah, I'm happy and glad to see many of the agile coaches are getting more and more exposure and learning professional coaching skills and different models that help move the whole community in the direction of more, how do we activate this inquiry and bring that generative dialogue to the community and to the organizations that we work with. So I'm glad that you shared the story here, the your learning and experience, and really appreciate your time. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Salah. It's always great chatting with you, and thank you for having me on the program.
Absolutely.
Hey, thank you for listening. I hope this conversation gave you something to think about or take action on. Remember, take action and get clarity. Then repeat.